is Pamela Kubis. If you're watching this and maybe someone shared it or someone told you about it, and I was listening to the Beckett Cook show this morning. I love his show, so if you haven't ever heard of it or seen it, I really encourage you to check it out, especially if you want to really be informed at what's going on in culture today. You want personal stories about people who have struggled with homosexuality or transgenderism or gender dysphoria, and you just want to know what is being said now in today's society, but also hear stories of redemption in those areas. I love his show, and he was interviewing in this particular one someone who has written many articles on just this transgenderism movement that we're seeing today. And God just really laid it on my heart that I need to share my story. And this is really hard for me because it's very vulnerable, and I don't know how many people will see this, and I don't know who will all share this. But I felt like God was just like, you need to share this. This is not just a story. This is my story, and it's a story that God allowed me to go through. And I truly believe that what we go through and our story is about His purposes. And so I need to share this as an encouragement, I think, and to provide a different story than what's being told out there, for the majority of the stories being told out there. And so I have chosen to use this avenue to share my story, but I do want to let you know this is not a message about what you should think or what you should do or what you should believe. This is just my story, and so whatever this does for you, that's great. But I want to let you know this is not a message that I'm trying to be pro or anti or whatever. I just want to share my story. So that's what this is, and that's what this is not. I want to just start by saying there's two primary things that I'm going to share with you, and the first one is what I had and what I didn't have. Those are the two primary things I'm going to talk about, and at the end I'm going to tell you what I have now. And so let me start with what I had. So I'm going to use the almost latest diagnostic manual for mental disorders, because I want to show you that what I'm saying is really valid for today, and I want to give you a different picture on it. So I'm going to go through the diagnostic criteria. So every mental disorder has certain criteria that you have to meet, at least a certain number of those, to be diagnosed with that disorder. And so what I have open to is the gender dysphoria, if you can see that, from the DSM-5. And I'm going to go through each one of these markers, and it's going to help tell my story of what I had. And then I'm going to give a little personal note to that, and then I'm going to go through what I didn't have. And so let's start with this. So based on this diagnostic manual, gender dysphoria in children is marked by incongruence between one's experienced or expressed gender and assigned gender of at least 6 months duration, as manifested by at least 6 of the following criteria. So just so you know, there's especially today, they distinguish between experienced and assigned. So they say an assigned gender is what we're given at birth. So when a baby's born and the doctor says, oh, it's a girl or it's a boy, That's your assigned gender. And then when they say experienced or expressed gender, it's what the child feels or desires or expresses as their gender. So I need to tell you what that means before we go on. So I just want to say before we get into the categories that I literally just listened to this interview this morning, and then God laid it on my heart to share my story. And so I haven't really prepped at all for this. So it may not be super well put together, but it's raw and it's authentic and it's genuine from my heart. So bear with me. But let's look at the first category. The first category is a strong desire to be of the other gender or an insistence that one is the other gender. So I definitely had that. As far back as I can remember, I was just drawn to everything boy. And we're going to get more in the details as we go, but I want to start with that. I definitely met criteria 1. And then it says, it gives the next category and it separates in boys or in girls. It says, in girls, a strong preference for wearing only typical masculine clothing and a strong resistance to wearing of typical feminine clothing. I definitely had that. I wanted to wear my brother's clothes all the time, but they were a lot older than me, but I got hand-me-downs and things like that. I did not want to wear a dress. I did not want to wear stuff with flowers on it. I did not want to wear super girly clothing at all. I actually remember the biggest kind of argument that I had with my parents when I was young, and we're talking from the time that I can remember to probably early to late middle school, is I didn't want to wear a dress to church. And luckily they compromised, and eventually I could wear a dress 2 Sundays a month, and I could wear pants 2 Sundays a month. But I'll tell you, and I don't even know if my parents know this, but I would always put shorts under my dress. I never wore a dress the way it was supposed to be worn. I always put shorts on. And part of that was I wanted to run around with the boys, and I didn't feel like I could do that with a dress on. So in my mind, probably partly rebellion, I wanted to wear the shorts because it felt like it wasn't a dress then. But then partly just I didn't feel safe to wear a dress and play with the boys and not have something underneath it. But I definitely wore pretty much, I would say 99% of the time, it was boys' clothes. Number 3, a strong preference for cross-gender roles in make-believe play or fantasy play. I don't remember ever playing anything typical that girls played. We would ride our bikes and play cowboys and Indians, and we would play cops and robbers, and we would shoot guns. We would play sports, which back in the early 80s, which this whole event for me was late 70s all the way through the 80s. In that time, like even sports, there were some girls' sports, but it just wasn't, especially in the Midwest. If you were really good at something and you wanted to play a sport, sometimes you would have to play on the boys' teams to be able to do it. And I loved everything sports and everything boy. Like if it was playing, I wanted to do that with boys. Number 4, a strong preference for the toys, games, or activities stereotypically used or engaged in by the other gender. And I think this is really kind of goes with the other, is I honestly did not play anything girl. And I want to go back to 3 because it just reminded me of something. Remember, I didn't prep for this. In the make-believe or fantasy play, is that my mom and dad recall a moment, and I honestly don't really remember it, but they recall a moment where when we lived in Mena, Arkansas, we had like this area that I think probably used to be a greenhouse, but we used it, I think, for storage and stuff. I don't really remember. I would have been 4 or 5 at the time. And my best friend was a boy, and we were playing house, and they could hear it from the window of their bedroom down into the greenhouse, and they heard us say we wanted to play house. And he was like, yeah, you be the mom and I'll be the dad. And I was adamant I was not going to be the mom. I was going to be the dad and he could be the mom. And I remember them saying like they cringed at that. And we're going to talk about that in a minute. But they didn't stop us or anything like that. But that was one very vivid moment where they remember this cross-gender role playing. I just, like, I wanted to be the guy. I wanted to be the dad, not the mom. And then, okay, so let's look at number 5. And actually, let's go back to 4 again because it said, actually, I think that's in number 6. So number 5 says a strong preference for playmates of the other gender. I will say this, other than 2, maybe 3 friends that I had that were girls, which they themselves were very tomboyish as well, so we had a lot of things in common. I didn't have girlfriends. They were all boys. And other than the ones that I had, because they were very similar to me and my preferences, I really didn't want to hang out with them. I didn't want to talk about what they were talking about. I didn't want to play what they were playing. I didn't like the drama that was involved in it. I liked that boys, we could be rough and tumble. See, I just said we, because I hung out with them all the time, but we could be super rough and tumble. We could like make jokes at each other. We could pick on each other, and we knew we were still going to be friends. Like there was just none of that. And everything boyish, to include my friends and the way they played and what they played with, I loved that. And I was really kind of turned off by everything girl. And so then in 6, this kind of goes with that. It says, in girls assigned gender, a strong rejection of typically feminine toys, games, and activities. So there's a very distinct story that I actually remember, and I was very young, but probably a lot of the details I remember are because I've heard the story so many times. But the only time I think I ever played with a doll was my sister's doll. And I got a hold of it, and I was throwing it across the room, having it hit the wall, and then I would take a red marker, and I would mark where it was hurt. So that's the extent of my playing with girl stuff. And even then, really, I played with it in the way the boy would play with it, not the way a girl would play with it. But I didn't like anything girlish. None of the toys, none of the role playing, none of the activities. It was a turnoff for me, honestly. All right, there's 2 more criteria, and this is where it gets really vulnerable for me, so hang with it. But I decided I was going to be honest, because if my story enlightens some of you who have kids who are going through this, or have kids who went through this, or maybe you did, I have to be completely vulnerable and honest with this. And some of this my family has never heard, probably don't know, and my kids now definitely don't know this. But I'm going to be totally honest, because glory to God, I am where I am today. So number 7 is a strong dislike of one's sexual anatomy. And number 8 is a strong desire for the primary or secondary sex characteristics that match one's experienced gender. I had both of those as well. So I remember literally hating my gender, hating it. And this was at 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, like just hating it. And I'm going to get into why I think that was later. I just want to do these criteria first. But I hated it so much and wanted the other so much. And honestly, I don't think I'd ever seen a penis in my life. Like, I don't think I'd ever even seen one. But I knew it existed, right? Like, I knew what boys had, I didn't have. And I can remember on the one side hating that I didn't have what they had and wanting what they had, to the extent of I can remember taking toilet paper and rolling it up in a ball and literally sticking it in my underwear and trying to wear it that way. And that's super vulnerable for me to share right now, but it speaks to the depth of what I was feeling and thinking at the time, as if that would make me more boyish, or that would make me a boy if I had that. I can remember learning about like periods and menstruation and all of that, and even having babies. And I remember thinking, never. And I remember praying to God, don't let me have my period and don't let me have babies. Because to me, that was everything feminine. And so to experience those things would mean that I was definitely a girl. And to not experience them would mean that I wasn't as much of a girl. And that's where my mindset was very early on. Okay? So this wasn't in like my teens even. This was earlier than that, all the way to like 7th, 8th grade. And I speak to that because, as you know, I don't think I said this. So to be diagnosed with gender dysphoria in children, you have to have 6 of the 8. We just went through all 8 and I had every single one of them. And not just a little bit, every single one of them to a T, to the extreme measure. I had that. And for B, so there's categories, right? So A was one category with all the subcategories, and then B is the second category, and it says, this condition is associated with clinically significant distress or impairment in social, school, or other important areas of functioning. I had that too. So I hated using a girl's restroom. I remember wanting to use the boys' restroom with them. But back then, like, we didn't have that availability. We didn't have that choice. In school, I remember, even though I didn't want friends that were girls, I was really made fun of by the popular girls because I looked like a boy, I acted like a boy, and all my boys were friends. I will say, luckily for me, I was very good at sports, so I was, for the most part, always picked first for kickball, always picked first for baseball, for any team that we had that was athletic. I was almost always picked first. And so the boys actually were my friends. So I had that. Now, if I hadn't had that athletic ability, I think it could have been very different for me. And we're going to get into that. But I had that. I remember just kind of hating that part of who I was because of being made fun of. But luckily, like I said, on the other side, it was balanced for me because I did have friends, and I had really good friends. And it did create distress in me in that, for instance, I was very good at athletics, like I said, and so I remember I played basketball on an all-guys team. For a while, I played soccer on an all-guys team. I really wanted to play baseball, but they had softball, so I ended up playing softball on a girls' team. And I remember, like, for the most part, the other teams did not know I was a girl, so I was good. But when they did, I can remember being made fun of by the other boys on the other team because I was a girl who looked like a boy, who played like a boy. But again, luckily, like, I made most of the points on my basketball team. I was a point guard on my basketball team. So there were all these things that God had given me, luckily, that helped. But I remember still going home feeling hurt and getting nervous before the games because I didn't want that. I just wanted to be one of the boys. So all that being said, I want to get specifically, that was part of what I had, okay? That would be disorder. Now, they didn't have really that kind of diagnostic criteria for gender dysphoria when I was growing up, luckily. But as you see, I had this to a T. Like, this disorder in this manual, I had it to a T. So let's talk about what I had on the flip side of it. I had, number one, I had parents who loved me. They loved me enough and they were balanced enough to not allow me to go full-fledged over to my thoughts and my feelings and my beliefs, but they actually allowed me to be a tomboy. They allowed me to play with the things I liked playing with, to do the things I liked doing, to have the friends that I was drawn to. They even, like, if you see pictures of me when I was little, and maybe I'll try and put some of those in here, I had to be balanced. So I wanted a short haircut, but my mom was like, yeah, but I still want you to look like a girl. So she had me get a perm. It looked horrendous. Love you, Mom, but it was bad. It looked so bad. But she was willing to kind of compromise and go and allow me to do some of the things I wanted to do, but she was very balanced and loving in the way. I may not have felt like it was loving at the time, but looking back, I know it was the loving thing to do. But they genuinely just loved me. They actually began to learn to really enjoy the aspects and the talents and the likes and dislikes that God had given me. And they allowed me to be that. And I'm going to balance this off, so hang with me. Number two, I had parents who trusted the Lord. And when I say that, I don't mean that just, oh, I trust the Lord. Specifically, they trusted his goodness and they trusted his sovereignty. And so for some of you, if you don't know what sovereignty means, sovereignty is this understanding that God is literally in control of everything that occurs. We see in Job that Satan even had to ask God for permission to touch Job, to hurt Job. And all along the way, at first God said, yeah, you can affect his life, but you can't touch his body, right? And then later he comes back and he had gotten rid of all of his family. He had killed off all his family except for his wife, and he had killed off all his children, and he took away all of his things. Like, everything was taken. Then Satan comes back, and God does give him permission to touch his body. You just can't kill him. And so then he gets horrible leprosy and all of this. Anyways, the point is, though, that even in that, Satan had to ask for permission. So God either allows, or he allows things to happen, or he makes things happen. So there's all of that. My parents trusted in that sovereignty. They trusted in his goodness, meaning that what God allows to happen and what he makes happen is for this overall purpose that sometimes we don't understand, but it's because he is good and he is sovereign that all things work together for the good of those who love him. And sometimes we don't get an understanding of that. But in my case, I have an understanding of that. And because they trusted him, they knew he doesn't make mistakes. They knew he had plans for my life, which included giving me these likes and dislikes and talents that contributed to who I am and who I was going to be. Even more importantly, they trusted that. So they didn't say I couldn't play sports that only had boys. They didn't say I couldn't wear shorts. They didn't say I couldn't dress like a boy. They allowed, I think they were patient in allowing God to work in my life, using those things for his glory. And I'm just going to stop right here and just say thanks to my parents, because had they not done that, it would be a very different story, and we're going to get into that in a second. But I know it had to be really, really hard for them. In the late 70s, early 80s, like, what we see allowed today, it just wasn't a thing that much back then. And I know that people had to judge them as parents and what they were allowing for me. They had to say things to them about me. But they just were steadfast in knowing who God was and his character. And that help them in developing my character. And so I'm really thankful for them. So let's talk about what I didn't have. What I didn't have were parents who, well, let me restate that. My parents never said that I might be something other than what I was. My parents never encouraged me to do boy things or to dress like a boy or to question my gender or any of that. They allowed me to dress like a boy. They allowed me to do boy things, but they never suggested that I do those things because I might be something other than I was. My parents never did that. They always affirmed who God created me to be. Or let me restate that. They affirmed the gender that God gave me. I want to be careful with those words because our gender or our sexuality is not our identity. It's part of who we are, but it is not our identity. My teachers all through school never encouraged me to think differently of my gender. They never encouraged me to question my gender. My doctors never encouraged my parents to promote a different gender than I was. My doctors never encouraged or suggested that there might be something wrong with my body compared to what I believed I was. There was none of that. And I thank the Lord that I did not grow up today. Because guys, think about everything in this book. I met all 8 of those categories, those subcategories, and I met both A and B categories. I did experience extreme distress. I did experience this complete feeling of bodily dichotomy, if you want to say that, where my body was something I didn't like based on my feelings, based on my thoughts, based on my likes and dislikes, all of those. It was like that was over here and my body was over here, and to me, they didn't match to an extreme portion to where I met all of these categories. But what I didn't have was so important, but not as important as what I did have. And what I'm getting at here is that in who my parents trusted, in the Lord and his good works and his goodness and his sovereignty and his plans, they trusted so much in that they were able to love me and have a perspective on what I liked and didn't like that didn't change or suggest anything about my gender. What it did was suggest something about maybe how God was going to use me for his glory in the future, in the lives that I was going to be able to touch, and the way in which God was going to form me into a woman who loves him and appreciates exactly how he made me. Through like the sports, for instance, I had this natural ability which led me all the way to even be able to play soccer for Teams USA and go to Europe and have all these experiences and play in all these cups. And it formed me. It formed this diligence in me, this discipline in me, this drive to succeed, this drive to do well in everything that I do. And I bring this up because even to the fact that like now finishing my PhD in biblical counseling and ethics and speaking sometimes on gender issues and working with people who struggle with their gender and with their sexuality, like that is such a gift that God has given me. And I don't just know truth, I experience that truth and transformation in my life. I no longer struggle with that at all. And I thank the Lord because I know some people may struggle with that their whole life and they can still honor God through that. They can still glorify him, but I don't. I don't once look at myself and think, oh, I wish I was a boy any longer. That literally is not a part of my life. What I do have now is incredible, right? I have a family, and I am so glad that God worked in my life to learn to love who He created me to be, which is a girl, right? Which is a female, because I have the most amazing children, Victoria and Nicholas and Madison, and I am so thankful for them in my life. If I had had what children have as the opportunity now, which is puberty blockers, and can you imagine, like, I think about it and it almost brings me to tears, because now the fact that they're allowing children to have reassignment surgeries, they're doing hysterectomies, they're removing this ability. The fact that they're changing the course of these children's lives. And guys, while I struggled with that, it was all feelings. When I think back, I've asked myself, so why did I struggle with that? And honestly, I don't think it had anything to do with just this blanket struggle of gender, or this blanket struggle of desiring to be somebody that I wasn't. And what I mean by blanket is just, it wasn't just something inside me that all of a sudden I wanted that. I was so loving everything boyish. And especially in the 80s, like, it just wasn't a great thing. There weren't tomboys with long hair and playing sports and still being beautiful and all of these things. It didn't exist. And so for me, the solution wasn't be me in that environment. And when I say be me, I mean the me that God created me to be, the female that God created me to be. In my little mind, it was, if I feel these things and I think these things, then gosh, I hate that I'm not these things. But that doesn't mean that's true of me. That doesn't mean that that fact is true of me. That's just how I was feeling. And guys, we are told in scriptures that the heart, the feelings, even the thoughts, they're deceptively wicked. They're deceiving. And so I think about the fact that I didn't have doctors and teachers and parents telling me, oh, well then maybe since you feel this way, or maybe that you think this way, maybe you are that. You were just born in the wrong body. I'm so thankful that I did not have that. Because what else I have is I have this incredible career now that is, and what I experienced is part of my compassion and my love for people that go through similar things. But I have this understanding now that what I went through wasn't a gender issue. Not really, not at the core. What I was going through was an identity issue. And guys, I am separating those two because it's true. What I am born as, what I am created as, is part of who I am, but it doesn't make my identity. I would hate for people to think that I have to say that I am a straight female every time that I see someone, or that I have to identify who I am at the core because of my gender or my sexuality. Because that's not who I am. Who I am is a created by God being, and created in His image. I am a child of God. I'm saved. I am walking with Him. I am trying to please my Lord and Savior. I am doing things in my life because I want to live out my identity, created in His image, child of God. I want to live that identity out in whatever way He gives me. That's who I am. And I happen to be doing that as a female, as a heterosexual. That is part of it, but it is not at the core of my identity. And I want so deeply in my career to help people understand that, just as we would say, we hope that my job isn't my identity. We hope that money or wealth or poverty isn't my identity. I want people to realize too what gender they are or sexuality, it's not the core of their identity. God did design us to live out our gender as He designed. He requires and desires that we live out our sexuality as He designed. Not based on our feelings or based on our thoughts about it or what culture says about it. And I'm so thankful that I grew up when I did, and I'm so thankful for the parents that I had, that they put into me this understanding of who I am and what my character should be, not based on anything culture has to say, but based on what God has to say and His character. I just want to close with this passage because literally, and I know so many of you have heard it before, but I want to read it now in light of what you've heard about my story and maybe in light of what you're going through or your children are going through, because I think it matters so much. In Psalm 139, I'm going to read Psalm 139, 1 through 16. And so just bear with me, but I want you to think about this from a gender perspective and a sexuality perspective and a purpose, life purpose perspective. So David says, "O Lord, you have searched me and you know me." He knew what I was going through. He knew what I was struggling with. "You know when I sit, you know when I rise. You discern my thoughts from afar." None of what I was going through was a question for Him or like He didn't know it. "You search out my path and my lying down and are acquainted with all my ways." He knew and He knows exactly what I was going through and what I was doing. "Even before a word is on my tongue, behold, Lord, you know it altogether. You hemmed me, you created me, behind and before." So what was at birth, what was before birth, He created all of that. He designed my gender, He created my likes and just all those things. And He was going before me and creating my path. "And are acquainted with all my ways. You hem me behind and before and lay your hand upon me." He was with me. "Such knowledge is too wonderful for me. It is high and I cannot attain it." And that's true of me right now. I can look back and I think, oh my gosh, I didn't have anything to do with my parents, my teachers, my time that I was born in, my culture that I was born into. I didn't have anything to do with that. God did. And it's just hard to grasp. And then He says, "Where shall I go from your spirit? Or where shall I flee from your presence? If I ascend to heaven, you are there. If I make a bed in Sheol, you are there. If I take the wings of the morning and dwell in the uttermost parts of the sea, even there your hand shall lead me, and your right hand shall hold me." He is sovereign, guys. He is there with us. He is present, but He also is leading. He's guiding. He's allowing. He's making things happen. "If I say, surely the darkness shall cover me, and the light about me be night, even the darkness is not dark to you. The night is bright as the day. For darkness is as light to you." Look at, darkness is constantly equated with like evil, but also depression and struggles and confusion and chaos. And I was experiencing so much of that. But what David is saying here is, look, even in those darkest moments of chaos and confusion, God is not confused and things aren't chaotic to Him. Because in that darkness, He is light. He can see what's coming. He knows what we're going through. He knows where He's leading us. And that is light. That's light in darkness. And I see that now. And here's what He says. So although we've gone through things and things seem chaotic and things seem dark and they don't seem to have a way out, He says, "For you formed," this is the lightness He's talking about, "because God formed my inward parts, made me. He knitted me together in my mother's womb." He designed me. He made me female. He designed me. All of this personality and all of these likes and dislikes and the things that I would be drawn to, He designed that. And He says, "I praise you, for I am fearfully and wonderfully made." So everything about that, everything about all of those likes and dislikes and my gender, I can praise him for that. I can find praise and delight in all of that. Wonderful are your works. My soul knows it very well. Everything he makes is wonderful. Every way that he makes it is wonderful. My frame, my body, was not hidden from him when I was being made in secret. Intricately woven in the depths of the earth. So this woven idea is like the DNA and who I am, and that includes my gender. His eyes, it says, your eyes saw my unformed substance. So before I was even bone and body and mind and gender, all of those things, it says, your eyes saw it. He knew it. In your book were written, every one of them. The days that were formed for me, my life, when as yet there was none of them. So before all of this occurred in my mother's womb, God had a plan for me, which included me being female, which included me, though, loving boy stuff and loving boy sports at the time and being good at those. He formed it for a purpose. And I am so very thankful for that. Because I would not be the woman of God that I am today. And I say that I would not be the woman of God. And I'm so thankful. Guys, today, culture says, if there's this dichotomy, if there's this struggle, if there's this chaos, then there must be a mistake. There must be a problem. There must be something wrong. And their solution is to change the body, not change the heart, to match the body. And guys, this is not a message telling you what to do or what to believe or what to think. This is my story. I am so thankful that my parents and the time that I was born in believed that to be true. That the heart decides, not the body. The body can never make a match with the heart. We know the feelings are deceptive. We know that the thoughts are deceptive. And so we have to begin to work on the heart part of that. We have to align the heart to what God has already decided is good. What God has already designed as good. The wonderful works that he made. We have to say, wait a second, if my heart's off, I need to work on the heart. And I'm so glad. That's what God did in me. By the time I was in high school, I still looked like a boy. I still acted like a boy. And God began to transform my heart. He began to work in me to change that. And I submitted to that. I don't think I did like intellectually, but I did. I submitted to that and I went towards that, and I thank the Lord for that. And yet, my past, I don't deny it. I don't reject it. I think about it and go, God, thank you. Look where I am today. Look what I'm doing today. And I have the opportunity to help others who are going through this begin to go, wait a minute. What did God create? And I want to love that. So I want to thank you guys for listening. You're more than welcome to share this. If you think someone else is going through something similar and needs to hear this, or you just want to share it. Guys, I want to just do a shout out to the Beckett Cook Show. I really think if you want to learn more about where we are in this culture and day and age and what it's saying about sexuality and gender and things like that, you've got to watch that show. Also, before I go, I just want to point out, there are some books that I think are really great for you to read. Let me start with what you could read, but I want to be very sensitive to it because it's very strongly written, but it's not from a biblical standpoint at all. But this book, The Transgeneration, by Ann Travers, is a very, very good look at what is occurring. Now, she's very pro-transgender, so you have to read it from the light of, wow, what is occurring and what is happening in our society? What kind of ideologies are we headed towards? But know that this is definitely transgender pro. So the good books I think would be great for you to read are Ryan Anderson's When Harry Became Sally. This is responding to the transgender movement. It's actually, it's pretty good. Another one is Andrew T. Walker's God and the Transgender Debate. And this is a pretty good book as well. So that's another one. Another one, this is kind of harder to read. It's very academic, but it's good. It's called Understanding Transgender Identities, 4 Views. So what that means by 4 views is it takes 4 different views on the transgender debate and talks about it from those different views, so you kind of understand what's going on out there. The next one that's a biography, which is great, is it says Transgender to Transformed. So this is about a woman who actually really, really struggled all the way through adulthood about feeling like she was trapped in the wrong body and everything that she did, actually, but how God transformed her life. It's a very good book to read. Another one, not written by a believer at all, Abigail Schreier. She's actually a homosexual, but it's a very, very good book. It's called Irreversible Damage: The Transgender Craze Seducing Our Daughters. And it really talks about history. It talks about, it's very statistical. So she uses a lot of science for her arguments. But it's very well written. And I think it's one worth reading. It's not pro-transgender. So just, that would be a great book for you to read. So guys, thank you for listening. If you want to know any of those books, I'll try to put them below, and you can read those or at the end of this video so that you can look those up. I just want to thank you for allowing me to get really personal on this and allowing me to tell my story. Thanks for watching. If you ever have any questions or want to reach out to me, my information is going to be at the end of this video and my website. So thank you, and God bless.